What's up guys, it's Matt B, and today we're going to be talking about you building your mental strength this marathon season. Do you have a marathon coming up? If so, you're probably putting in the work, the physical work, but are you putting in the mental training? That's what we're talking about. Let's get into it. Hey guys, I came across an article on Polar. It's Polar's blog side of their website, and they often have a lot of good articles, but today we're talking about building that mental game for your upcoming marathon. And the article is actually called Tips to Build Mental Strength This Marathon Season, because I think that a lot of us, we kind of push that to the side. It's very easy to focus on our physical training, especially if you're following a plan that's already been made for you. It's just like going down the recipe week after week. You're hitting those workouts, you're putting in the effort, but you are just following instructions. Building your mental resiliency can be a bit trickier, but not building your mental resiliency can really spell disaster on race day. Look, it doesn't happen every time. Some races are relatively easy. Some races, your fitness will just carry you through. It may be strange to hear if you haven't actually experienced this, but there are some races where you can race at race pace and still feel like you can keep going when you get to the end. But for all those other races, when that doesn't happen, it's good to have some tips ready to grab onto, because we all know we like following a recipe, you know, our training plan. We can make the same thing for our mental training, kind of. Anyway, the first one is to train your brain for the long haul, and basically that encompasses everything we're talking about. We are training our brain for when things get difficult. And the article uses a very good analogy. It says how easy it is to communicate when someone is listening, but it gets a little more difficult when there's loud music playing or someone is screaming at you. And they use that to demonstrate how easy it is to have a solid mental game when your body isn't hurting. But when you get to mile 20 in the marathon and your legs are heavy and your heart rate is spiking and you're really just not feeling your best, that's when it gets a little difficult to encourage your body to continue through the pain. So in this case, it's pretty obvious we're talking about hitting the wall. Up until that point, your body feels good. It's easy to tell yourself to keep going when your body feels like it can keep going. It's when it feels like it can't keep going that you have to learn how to communicate to your brain that your legs are capable of keeping going, to keeping the pace, even though they obviously don't feel like it. The second tip for practicing that mental strength is to practice visualization. And this is a good one. This is something that we can do every day, day in and day out on all our training runs. And we can do this in a couple of different ways. We can actually imagine the course that we're running on. If you've done course recon or you've run this race in the past, you can be out on your run, on your training run, just thinking about the course, or you can use feeling and you can visualize your feelings. And if we're visualizing our feelings late in a marathon, it's probably going to be that we're visualizing discomfort. So I want you to visualize what it feels like to push through when your body doesn't want you to keep going. How are you going to feel as the miles go by? That is something that you're going to be running through your mind, doing a dress rehearsal. But it's not just about the negative. We also have to visualize the positive aspects. So visualize yourself getting to key moments in the race. Perhaps if you're running a marathon, perhaps it's the halfway point. And of course, we've got the finish line. You can actually visualize crossing that finish line, achieving your goals, your arms in the air. All your hopes and dreams around this race are coming true. Look, this visualization, it isn't actually as easy as it sounds by just me telling you about it. This is something that you actually have to train. In the same way that you're training your body physically to deal with the stresses of running for a long time, the same goes for the mental training. Practice it every day when you're out on a run, and you will find success when it counts. The third tip is to jot down some mantras. And if you have mantras that you've used in past races, I'd love to hear about them in the comments. But basically, this tip is talking about pre-planning. So we're removing the roadblocks of having to come up with mantras in the minute when we actually need them. If we jot them down, we cement them in our minds and we can pull them out when they're actually needed. And the same thing with training. When you're going through a difficult time in your training, you can pull out these mantras and you can use them and you can test them. And you might find out that one mantra works better than another. And generally, I've read that we have to keep our mantras on the positive side. And by that, I mean statements like I am strong, rather than I can overcome this discomfort. Apparently, when we actually think the word discomfort, it can be negative to us. I don't actually know if that's true, but I know that I've read it and it seems like it could have some truth behind it. What are your thoughts? Anyway, I guess the point is to write them down and train with them. Then on race day, you can just pull them out and use them and you'll know that they work. The fourth tip for mental training, this is a good one, is not to stress. Perfection isn't real. I think this is an important one for all of us. Very easy to fall into a trap of comparing ourselves to others. If we're looking at people on Strava, if we're looking at people on Instagram, we're only seeing the good side. We're seeing the successes and not the work it takes to actually get there. So really be consistent. Go out, knock out your workouts, but if you're not hitting the splits that you think you should be splitting, don't worry. You still went out there, you still put in the work. That counts for a lot. Remember, when we're training for a marathon, it takes a long time. Consistency is the main ingredient in this cake, so just stay consistent, and if you don't hit the bullseye on every single workout, it's totally okay. It's not going to derail your training. The fifth mental tip is to fuel your positivity, and I like this one. Now, you and I both know that as we approach a race, we're going to be on our phones, and we are going to be looking at that weather every single day, probably a lot more than just once a day. We're going to be looking at the weather, and we're going to be stressing over it. Is it perfect? Is it too hot? Is it too cold? Is the wind going to be blowing? Is it going to be raining? Sometimes we're going to worry about our fueling. I guess the point is that there is always a lot of stuff to worry about. But do you ever just turn it around and then think about what happens if it's absolutely ideal? What happens if the weather is perfect on race day? What am I going to do then? And I bet very few of you have actually thought about it this way. And the reason I say that very few of you have thought about it this way, because I haven't actually ever thought about it this way. But the article points out that there's actually no basis in these negative thoughts, right? We're worried about something that we have no control over for the most part, weather. As far as fueling goes, we would have practiced that in training. So why not just focus on the positive aspects and try and remain positive for the entire time leading up to the race? Race day is going to take care of itself. No point stressing ourselves beforehand. The sixth way you can practice your mental resiliency going into your marathon season is by embracing your doubts and talking it out. And the article states that it's absolutely normal for doubts to creep in, but it also says that we need to acknowledge those doubts and talk about it with people that might understand. Now, the article suggests talking it out with supportive friends, family, or even a therapist, but I think there's an important distinction in these three things, and that's to maybe talk to another runner about it, because another runner has already been through those same doubts. And as another runner, it's often easy to see the flaws in someone's logic of doubt. Do you know what I mean? It's difficult when I am worrying about something, it seems a lot more important and big than it really is. But if someone else is worrying about the same thing, it's easy for someone else to say, hey, that's not really a big deal. You've got this. You've done the training. Just go out and take care of business. Anyway, acknowledge those doubts, talk about it. It'll help you out. The seventh way to find mental strength is to find your reason. And I always think this is a great one on paper, especially for people that are running for a charity or they're doing to support something outside of their actual running. I think it gets a little more challenging for someone like me, let's say, because I am running just for fun, or I'm running so I can make content. But still, in the past, when I've been running and I've got into a really dodgy spot mentally, I found it does help to remind myself that I chose to put myself in this position, right? This is actually fun for me. Now, it may not feel fun in the moment, but you know what? When you do push through and you finish that race, that part's going to be fun. So why not just get through it, push on through? The eighth way to build that mental strength is to prep your perfect playlist. And I think this is probably going to be better for some of us than others, because generally speaking, I don't listen to music when I'm out for a run. Occasionally when I go out for a long run, I will put on an audiobook. But if you've ever run while listening to an audiobook or a podcast, it isn't really something that pumps you up and keeps you moving forward. But if you are someone that likes to run with music, just finding out what music works best for you is going to be a great way to push through when things get tough. Number 9, practice gratitude. I think this is a big one. And I think it is very difficult to actually practice gratitude in the moment when you're in pain, when you're hurting. And that's why we need to practice it in training, or at least know that we're going to think about that when things start getting more difficult. Because if you're running in a marathon and you've hit the wall and things aren't going exactly as you ideally would hope they would, you know, your legs are burning, your heart rate is spiking, all those things. Practicing gratitude is going to let you tap into those friends, those other running friends that may be injured, people that are disabled and they are not able to run a marathon, even though they would do anything to be exactly where you are in that moment. And the 10th way to build that mental strength is to remember that this is supposed to be fun. And sometimes it doesn't always seem fun in the moment, but it's up to you to find your fun. That could be high-fiving some spectators as you're running by. It could be singing. It could be cheering. It could be encouraging yourself. It could be encouraging other people. There are a lot of ways to have fun while you're running a marathon. But again, it's easier said than done. When you're deep in the pain cave, it's tough to stick your head out and celebrate. But guys, it's your turn. I want to hear from you. What mental strategies do you lean upon when things get tough in a race? It doesn't have to be a marathon. I think these mental strategies can actually play a big part in any race that you are pushing yourself in order to do a little better than you ordinarily would. But let me know in the comments. And my friends, if you have made it to this point in the video, I want you to drop the flamingo emoji in the comments, just so I know that you've made it all the way to the end. And look, I know that a flamingo has absolutely nothing to do with what we were talking about, but before I pressed record on the camera, my wife and I were watching Wonka, and there were some flamingos in the last scene that we watched. So with that, it's Matt B. This has been a video on how to increase your mental strength moving into marathon season. Be kind, be happy, run well. I'll see you in a couple of days.